where you can go for a bit of board inspiration. And we'll finish up with a bit of an Ask Me Anything. I'm hoping you guys will have some good questions that'll really make me think. So please don't be shy. Ask me anything you want towards the end. But I want to kick things off with a quick icebreaker straight into the theme of theming. So for anyone on the board, please pick up one of the pins on the left here. And we're going to run a quick icebreaker for the session. Just drop it on whichever of these characters, themes that you think will be your favorite. I'll stick a quick timer on for, say, a minute.
And if they are behind the assets, you need to bring them to the front, otherwise you won't be able to see them.
Ah, good point.
Well,
good
but they are behind the Star Wars one anyway.
Let me raise these up then.
This is also a little tutorial on Miro tips.
I'm glad we've got an expert on the call, not an amateur like me. Okay, looks like Star Wars is in the lead. Last 20 seconds for anyone that hasn't dropped one on. Okay, great. Looks like Star Wars is the winner. So what I will do, I will come over here. And we'll take this over. Okay, so on the next slide, what I've done is I've dropped one of my themed icebreakers on. And this is called the Skywalker scale. Quite an open-ended icebreaker, one that gets the creative juices flowing a bit, leaves it a bit open-ended for your team to be a bit more expressive. But what I'd like you to do is pick one of the lightsabers below and just drop that where you feel you are in terms of the question we've got. So how ready are you feeling for Christmas 2022? Are you a happy Anakin, all ready to go? Or are you a bit on the dark side, still loads to do, no shopping in yet? Again, I'll give, say, 30 seconds this time, and we'll see what the spread looks like. Looks like we've got a lot of people who are very eager. Everyone seems to be quite happy. I think mine would be down at the far end. I should probably start before Christmas Eve this year. Okay, excellent. Great spread. Everyone seems to be more prepared than me, which is nice. But yeah, this is just to sort of get a little bit of a dipping our toe in the water around theming, around what it is that we're going to be looking to build with these elements and how we're going to build elements around different sort of mechanisms and core features, and how it sort of extends beyond just the questions that you ask the team. We can build in things like icebreakers, retro ratings, dot votes. There's all sorts of stuff we can do that we'll get into as we go. Want to start with a little bit of a question. Happy for you guys to come off mute and ask and answer sort of on audio, or if you want to type in the chat, that'd be great. I know some of you have, but have you ever ran a themed retro before? And if so, do you notice anything different about it to traditional retrospectives? Happy to take any answers. If anyone wants to come off mute, that'd be great.
There's a degree of risk. Is it the right theme?
I did one this week, and the response I got was it gets us to think differently. We might pose sort of the same questions, but it just gets them to think in a different terms.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's the similar thing to what you see with the daily stand-up. Instead of just going through the 3-question routine, leaving different stuff out there hanging for the team to grab onto, and you'll get different responses. That's really good. Anyone else? Sorry, I got a little bit of feedback at the start there. Anyone else ran these before? Any interesting feedback from them?
I think along with what Jeff said, it just makes some things that were invisible before visible. Like if you ask the standard questions, that's what you get, and people kind of tune out. So I found increased engagement, as well as it really opens up it allows them to think outside the box, think more creatively, and it really makes the invisible visible.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff in there. So the engagement's a big one. I'll touch on that, and also breaking that monotony with the traditional sessions, especially with teams who've ran stand-ups for years and years and never veered away from those 3 questions. It's dead easy to settle into a steady routine and a steady diet of the same questions and the same answers. So yeah, really good points. Anyone else before we move things on? Okay, great. So themed retrospectives, a little bit on the what. So for me, a themed retrospective will give you a fresh twist, a new angle or a new slant on an existing session. As a facilitator and a Scrum Master, it gives you sort of another string to your bow, another way to facilitate, another avenue to explore. And it serves for me as a bit of a foundation and a platform for a collection of benefits, some tangible, some not so tangible. But for me, it really is the start of a lot of good things in your team. And you'll notice these, the more you do them, these benefits can sort of accrue and grow over time. So the number one question I normally get with a themed retrospective is why bother? Why put the effort in? I'm sure Chris will back us up. It's not always a small endeavor to try and put these retrospective sessions together. It's a significant time investment. And oftentimes you'll convince yourself that you've got other things that you could be doing, more value-added activities that you could be spending your time on as a Scrum Master, a project manager, an agile delivery lead. For me, there's 3 main strands that I like to harken back to. Theming the retrospective for me keeps the meeting engaging and productive. As you sort of touched on there, Jamie, it's very easy to slip into an autopilot routine if we've ran the 4 Ls for the last 8 retrospectives and the 9th one's going to be the 4 Ls once again. I'm a firm believer if you ask the same questions for long enough, after enough time, you'll start to get the same answers back. So theming the sessions is a really good way to reframe those questions, leave different options out there for the team, and hopefully get something new and dynamic from the session. Removing monotony and apathy is another big one for me. I think the monotony of sessions, the steady rhythm that we get into, and that really steady diet of 4 Ls or mad, sad, glad is a really easy way for complacency to start setting in within the team. When the team are sort of on autopilot in those sessions, it's easy for them to overlook how the team dynamics, how the environment, how the product market fit, how the inter-team dynamics are changing. And that ultimately leads to a lower level of transparency throughout the team. The sort of number one thing that I like to do at the start of a retrospective session is make sure that we're all looking at the same things. The transparency's high. We're all discussing the same, not necessarily the same items on the agenda, but we've all got a clear view of how the product looks, how the project's progressing, how the team are working together. Removing that monotony is a great way to increase that. And the final one, and this is particularly important now we're in sort of the remote and hybrid work landscape, is strengthening team relationships. If any of you have looked at any of Simon Sinek's work around Start With Why, high performing teams, the strengthening of relationships doesn't usually happen during work discussions. And what I mean by that is trust and friendships and relationships in your team aren't going to grow talking about lines of code, talking about code coverage, talking about TDD and BDD. The team relationships, the friendships, the strengthening of those is going to happen through those side of desk chats where we're not strictly talking about work activities, where we're talking more about the people as people, where we're talking about interests outside of work, we're talking about family, we're talking about things that in a black and white world don't necessarily affect the quality of the product, but in the world that we all live in as humans, we need to have that sort of relationship and closeness with each other. And this is a really good way to change the dynamic of that conversation and get the team more invested in each other. So I'll go through a few of these themes in a bit more detail. As I've just touched on there, by going remote, there's a lot of things that we've lost from when we were physically co-located. For example, body language is the first one that goes away. I think the majority of communication, I forget the number, it's somewhere around the 80 to 90% mark, is non-verbal. And I'm sure we've all felt this over the course of the last couple of years, where you receive a Teams message or a Slack ping, you read it one way and start to feel a certain way about it, but the person on the other end has not intended it in that way, and then an atmosphere or a mood can descend from there. Having these sort of visual cues, the body language, the non-verbal comms really helps to sort of set the tone for the conversation and develop that steady cadence of comms and that back and forth relationship between team members, and ultimately trust can build from there. We lose richer context. I've been meaning to reword this for a while. It's not necessarily that the contexts digitally aren't just as rich, but they aren't as directly shared as they were before when we were in physically the co-located space. And having that shared context, that shared space really helps to build in that sort of cohesive unit of the team. Sort of touches on the next point that I've written there, the side of desk chats. Another common complaint I hear now is a conversation before that would have taken 30 seconds, me standing up over the monitor to speak to someone, get an answer and continue, now needs to be booked in as a 30-minute Microsoft Outlook meeting. That sort of ad hoc, really quick and dirty comms is sort of starting to erode away. Especially the verbal comms. We can still use Slack and pings, but again, those are quite easy to ignore. And generally remote, although this is improving, the engagement levels in sessions like a retrospective, it's very easy for teams to turn their cameras off, start looking at pings and emails, and the engagement in the session goes straight into the gutter. Theme in the retrospectives is meant to sort of address a lot of these, give people an avenue to explore more sort of personal, more off a strict work topic theme, and give people a bit more of that sort of co-located feeling back, even though we are in those remote and hybrid sessions. The other thing I notice with retrospectives is when we start cutting corners in Scrum, when we start heading into that Scrum butt territory, retros are quickly seen as the most expendable event in Scrum. The daily Scrum tends to be a staple for teams. The review, generally, we can't get out of because we're committed to showing something to a customer. The sprint itself always tends to stay. The planning event, again, sort of can't get around that because that informs what we're going to tell the customer that we're going to deliver. The retrospective is the one that I feel is always looked at as we can double this up later, we can shorten this one down, we can skip it over. And for me, that's really sad, because I can see why from management and leadership and people who want to initiate in agile practices, they could see the retrospective as potentially the least valuable of those events. But for me, the retrospective is the event that has the highest level of intrinsic value to the team themselves. It's a session that's by the team and for the team. And this is really where we can harness that bottom-up intelligence and start to bubble up the ideas, the improvements, and the impediments that the team are seeing where the rubber meets the road. And they can then start to make their way up to the people who can make decisions, change architectural elements of the organization, and really improve things. So when I see teams starting to use this Scrum, but cut the corner, we'll skip the retro this time, we'll do a double next time, I really encourage teams, and especially Scrum Masters, to protect it, because for me, the retrospective is the cornerstone of continuous improvement, and continuous improvement is the foundation of Agile. So it's really important for me to protect that. Engagement, we've touched on a little bit. And what I found with retrospectives is when we are using the same style, if we're using 4 Ls sort of religiously, if we're using mad, sad, glad every session, if we're doing went well, was poor, what can we change? It's very easy for people in those sessions to give you the same answers. It's very easy to slip into autopilot. It's very easy to just talk about the things that we always talk about. One thing I notice in teams that I work with is they'll often touch on issues that are beyond the scope of the individual team to change. It may be something sort of core architecturally to the organization or business that requires leadership buy-in that'll take a long time to go through. And when we're using these repetitive sessions, it's very easy for team members to use this, and you'll have to take this the way it's intended, but use it as a bit of a cop-out. Instead of really driving and engaging with the session, it's very easy to just pull up those sort of long-lived problems that we know aren't going anywhere, and then think, right, well, I've done my bit for this session. And as I say, this familiarity, this autopilot, this sort of ABC approach to the retrospective is where complacency can set in, and a little bit of apathy. And that's where the lack of transparency starts to creep into the team. And then it's a matter of time before a problem comes up that we saw warning signs for that we ignored. And now it's become a really big issue in the team that we need to address. One of the biggest elements for me of the themed retrospectives is it makes things fun. I hand on heart believe that work can be fun if you let it. You can enjoy elements of what you do, and you can come into work and have a good time with people. And I've found with the teams that I work with, injecting that more human to human communication element and those conversational dynamics really brings a more engaging, fun, vibrant atmosphere to your sessions. And one thing that I always encourage teams to do is just build in creativity to their ways of working as sort of a core value. Don't be scared to try something new. Don't be scared to make something and share with the team. Don't be scared to express yourself in your work. I think a big part of my work is working with junior teams, especially sort of breaking through that sort of outer shellac of professionalism, or the fear of making a mistake, or the fear of being branded as, or there's Dave the fun retro guy, but that's all you're branded as. I really encourage teams to be more expressive in their role and bring a lot more of their personality in where they can. Building empathy is also a cornerstone of my retrospectives. And a lot of the ways that I leverage this is through the icebreakers and ice melters. These are sort of great warm-ups for the session. They get that conversational dynamic flowing quite early. And in a lot of the templates that I put together, I'll sort of bounce between icebreakers that are related to the retro traditionally as you would view it. So we'll do a bit of a warm-up for things that we want to think about in the session. But other times I'll do something that's just a bit more fun, a little bit more getting to know each other, a little bit more of a game. And I'll sort of trick the team into joining that gamified dynamic, and the conversation. After that point, you'll find it can naturally emerge, and you'll, as a facilitator, you'll see things emerge during that conversational dynamic that you can then just plug straight into the main part of the retrospective at that point. You'll notice the things the team joke about, the things that we talk about in the retrospective, the icebreaker, I should say, the elements that they bring to that sort of warm up, all hands on deck element. You'll see that feed directly in, and keeping that conversational dynamic through the session becomes a lot easier. Sort of touched on this one already, creativity. And another thing we've touched on, asking questions differently gets different answers. I'm a hand on heart firm believer. If I ask the same questions for long enough, eventually you'll start giving me back the same answers. What I like to do, especially in the daily scrum, is just leave a lot of different things out there hanging in the air for the team to latch onto. So instead of saying something like, have you got any blockers today? I'll say something like, what's the number one thing that I or the team could do for you to make your life easier today? We're touching at the same sort of core thing, what's in the way that we can help you with, but by asking it in a different way, I force the person to engage their brain a little bit more and think about what would be the biggest help, instead of just listing off the blocker from yesterday, the blocker from the day before. Psychological safety is especially in dispersed hybrid teams, it's a tricky one to get right. You're going to be part of a team that has goals, has milestones, has things that they're driving towards, but you don't want to be the sort of traditional project manager driving the team, cracking the whip, forcing things forward. And keeping a high degree of psychological safety for me is a great way to get buy-in from your team and get that real honest and candid level of commitment around what the team can commit to, what we feel is possible, what we feel we can produce. And then you'll also get pushback where we think we're going too far, where we think that we're stretching. But because that psychological safety element's there, the team aren't afraid to make mistakes. They aren't afraid to stretch. They're much less likely to sort of play within themselves. And what I mean by that is they're not going to think of it in the, again, to look back at traditional project management, we would give sort of a 20% buffer to any estimate just to be on the safe side. When we've got that level of psychological safety and the team aren't scared to make mistakes, they know they're not going to be punished for getting a prediction wrong, for making a mistake during the course of the project. They're much more likely to really stretch and try and give 100% instead of saving that bit back in reserve, which is ultimately embodies the Scrum values and is exactly the type of level of commitment that you want from the team. The other thing in terms of retrospectives is I found by moving to gamified and even almost like an amateur dramatic type feel, by giving the team a character to play instead of being themselves, they can play devil's advocate a little bit more because they don't necessarily feel like this is me as Dave saying what I think's wrong with the team. For example, in a Game of Thrones retrospective, I would say, what would Tywin Lannister say about this team? Anyone that's seen Game of Thrones will know that Tywin's merciless. So the team member in question may not feel quite as exposed if they know that I'm doing what Tywin would do instead of what I as Dave honestly think. And ultimately the psychological safety, once that bedrock's in there, the level of trust and the openness throughout the team just goes through the roof. The trust that as a Scrum Master and development team, but also the trust between the developers themselves. Ultimately, the developers are the one producing the product, doing the hard yards. Having that increased level of trust between them just pays dividends in the long run of a product and a project. And the final sort of why element is strengthened relationships. And it opens a different avenue for conversation in your retrospectives. We're not just talking about how many lines of code have we churned out, how much test coverage do we have, are we confident that the environment's scaled effectively to tolerate a load test? We're now talking to each other sort of as human to human, as person to person. And it moves the discussion off that just purely work focus, and we can sort of get behind that layer of professionalism and get a feel for the people in the team. The sort of phrase I turn on this, it allows the relationships to grow far more organically. Instead of you as a Scrum Master or facilitator carving out 2-3 hours in the team's diary and saying, right, you must have fun now, you must like each other now, you've sort of opened up that conversation to allow the team to make more spontaneous, intelligent, more creative decisions in the session, and they can be the drivers of it then, which ultimately leads to that openness increasing and the relationships growing more organically and going from strength to strength. Okay, great. So lots of reasons why. Before we go into theming itself, the other element I always like to touch on when I talk about themed retrospectives is platforms. Depending on what you want to get out of the session, and I talk about this more in other talks, is you can predispose your session to get you the outputs that you want by selecting the appropriate platform, the appropriate channel, the appropriate level of co-location. And it sort of comes back to a thing I see a lot about these retrospectives. You need to know your team to know how far to push the envelope on some of these. And we'll go into this as we go through these platforms and channels, but that's sort of a core tenet I'd like you to take away from the session today. Understanding your team, the team dynamic, the inter-team dynamic is very helpful in how you then go forward and shape these sessions to get the best outputs that we're looking for. Ultimately, the retrospective is there to plan ways to improve quality and effectiveness. And by knowing your team to that deeper level, having the appreciation of the relationships and dynamics within the team, you've then got far more levers to pull to enable the team to produce those ways to increase the quality and effectiveness at the end of the session. But before we dive too deeply into that, let's talk a little bit more about platforms. So one I'm sure we're all familiar with is the whiteboard, like the one I'm using now on Miro. And whiteboards are really fertile ground at the minute. It's amazing. Every man and their dog seems to be having a go at putting some kind of whiteboard tool together. And this time last year, there were sort of two big players, Miro, Mural, and everyone else was sort of a second best. But I would even go as far to say now Miro sort of won the battle here. I think Miro stands head and shoulders above the rest. But just to rattle through, we've got Miro, we've got Notion, Figma, FigJam, Canva, Microsoft Whiteboard, Metro, Retro, tons and tons and tons of different whiteboard options out there. And well worth investing in, especially for your hybrid, dispersed, non-co-located teams. It sort of brings back a little bit of an element of that shared physical space, which is helpful in having that shared context within your team. All sorts of different features and plugins. I can't go into much detail on those in this session, but one thing I always encourage people to do on Miro is have a look through the app space that we've got here. There are tons and tons and tons of different apps that we can plug in to add different fields, add different widgets, add different elements to the session. And even pasting things like iframe code in there is really helpful to get things like dice rolls for gamified retrospectives that I've done. So well worth exploring and well worth taking the time to deepen your knowledge in the whiteboard space. Audio is another one. And I quite like audio because this gives you an avenue to choose between a synchronous and an asynchronous session. So when I think audio, I think a lot about the Secret Podcast retrospective, where I will give teams 2 or 3 questions to then take away and record answers on their own, where they can either use sort of a native microphone app that can do a self-recording on Zoom or Teams, and they'll sort of individually go through the answers that we've got. And then either asynchronously, I can identify themes within those to present back to the team. But my favorite version of this is where the team come to a shorter session with those recordings, and we'll go through the questions together at that point, and we'll play their responses to the questions one by one. Really elevates the psychological safety. At the time the team are recording these alone, they can be far more candid. And it really opens up for a level of candor, honesty, transparency in the shared element of the session, where you'll be surprised at the diversity of ideas that you get when you don't have either an overzealous facilitator, a senior member of the team, a sort of a cultural architect within the team, anchoring the more junior members to their opinion when they speak first. It's a really good way to crowdsource that diversity of thought and bubble up more sort of niche, more creative, more out there suggestions to the fore and have those come up for consideration within the team. The next one, I love this, and it's, in my view, it's the future of remote work and generally, are the VR retrospectives. I do quite a lot on Vispa, but there are also tools like Second Life, Metaverse, Work Adventure, where we can create a shared virtual space and get as close as we can, given the technological limitations, to bring in a hybrid and dispersed team into the same room again. I think eventually this will just be a sort of business as usual element for dispersed teams. And it generates a lot of buzz and excitement in the team. We've got that shared space, but not only are we back in the same office, are we back in the same building, everyone has the creative power at their fingertips to build whatever they want to build in this shared universe. So it really does get us back to that sort of your imagination's your only limit with these sessions. As I say, I'm a huge fan of these. I really love them. I always do recommend them with a word of caution though. These are great tools and I think they're the future of work, but as of right now, you sort of need to have the right team and the right sort of audience to utilize these sessions. Zoom fatigue is noticeable after a long time on Zoom, these tools are far more stimulating and far quicker to bring you to that sort of Zoom fatigue, VR fatigue level. So if you are going to use these or experiment with them, I encourage you to do so, but really give yourself the time and space to think about how you want to implement it, how you want to squeeze the most value out of these sessions, and then how you're going to get out of Dodge without boring the team to tears on these sessions. And then the last one, and in a lot of ways my favorite, is in person. And it's become a bit of a forgotten art, this one. For me, there's no substitute for in-person communications. As I talked about earlier, those non-verbal cues that we lose by going remote really do hamstring those natural and organic comms. I love to sprinkle these in with hybrid teams if we need to do, as part of an organizational policy, say 2 days in, 3 days out. On those 2 days in, I'll deliberately manufacture it so we can get sessions like this on those in-person days. And then we can really start to harness the benefit of being there in person with the type of session that you want to design. And retrospectives can really serve as those team builder and engagement catalysts for you and your teams when you get that chance to be there in person together. Okay, so we've talked about why, we've talked about what, we've talked about platforms. We now want to talk about the how. And the first thing we want to talk about is, how do we select themes? Lots of different ways to do this. And it's really fun to immerse your team in a different experience for a little while. Get us sort of break the sort of office dynamic, get people out of that work and solo coding away for hours on end. One criticism I've seen a lot, and one question I've been asked a lot, is, do they always have to be nerdy and geeky? And I'm really glad Chris is on the call, because Chris has done some fantastic retrospectives that are more to do with sort of core agile philosophy. He's done one on the eight wastes of software development. I've seen one on 3-5-3, the 3 events, 5 values, 3 roles. Really interesting stuff. So your imagination here is your only limit. The other sort of element that I like about selecting theme is rotating it around the team. I might kick us off with one that I'll push the envelope on a little bit just to get those creative juices flowing. But then we'll rotate the responsibility for theme selection and even session facilitation around the team. And again, this really opens it up for the team members to express themselves, to inject that creativity into their roles and show a little bit more of their personality with the team, and allow those relationships to really start to thrive and go from strength to strength. The next question I get asked is, what should I use to build a themed session? Not so much talking about platforms here, but subject matter. And the answer I always give is absolutely anything. You can take TV show. Well, we'll go through a lot of the mechanisms next, but for now, absolutely anything can be used to leverage and turn into an effective session with that sort of themed spin or that angle on it. The first mechanism, which is always a rich vein, always a fun one with the team, is characters and roles. We can take a TV show, a movie, literature, and look at the retrospective through those characters. So, for example, in the Game of Thrones one that I talked about, what would Tywin say was bad? What would Cersei say was good? What would Tyrion expect us to try and experiment with in the next session? And then we can also have more sort of open-ended questions where, in an office retrospective, I could say, what would Michael say about our previous sprint? What would Dwight have said? What would the prevailing theme be throughout the team as a whole? So characters and role-based, really helpful. And the final point on this is, what I'll occasionally do is, instead of having a strict set of questions and answers, I'll go back to a more traditional retrospective, like a 4Ls or a Mad Sad Glad. But instead of asking the team directly, I'll say to the team, okay, developer 1, you're Michael. Developer 2, you're Jim. Developer 3, you're Dwight, and so on. And they'll play that devil's advocate a little bit, and they'll be able to push that character and really drive out a lot more opinion and a lot more subject matter for us to get into in the session. And B, it again covers that diversity of thought, and we can come at this from a lot of different angles then. So characters and roles are really rich for to get started. Quotes, lyrics, and references, another really good one. A lot of the musical retros that I do will take quotes. I did one on Jay-Z that was great, just did a lot of his album covers and hits from the album. Again, though, literature, I've seen a lot come through with sort of direct quotes from novels, from plays, from poetry. And this is really good for teams where you can experiment with running music in the session. I can't quite quantify what it is, but by having music playing in the sessions, there's something happens in the session that I can't quite put my finger on yet. And I'm really interested if other practitioners have tried this or would be interested to try it. There's something that happens in the conversation when music's playing that I can't quite put my finger on, but there's an effect there, and I'd be interested to know if anyone else has experienced that. Topical and event driven. These sort of go with the calendar or sort of milestone events. Last month, Chris ran a great sort of, I don't know what I'd call it, like a challenge promotion where he pulled together a lot of Halloween themed retrospectives. We saw a lot around the time of the Jubilee, and at the minute there'll be tons and tons of Christmas retros doing the rounds. So these type of topical ones can be great. I've ran a couple of Christmas themed retrospectives with teams that I work with at the minute, and they're really helpful, not only for the retrospective itself, but again, getting the team in that shared cultural sort of space. And this is great when we've got teams that are diverse and dispersed. For example, I work with one team where we have a development core in the UK, but we also have developers in India, in the Middle Eastern region. And it's great for them to come with their sort of event-driven and topical ones around things like Diwali and Hanukkah and get a bit more of a different feel and really broaden the horizons of the team. Final one I want to touch on, and I haven't quite came up with a good way to phrase this, but rule-based activities. And what I generally mean by that is games, sports, any sort of structures where we've got the team members are going to know the established rules, and we can leverage that and turn that into a session. So, for example, I've done retrospectives around FIFA Ultimate Team, where the team pick the players they want and generate prompts via with the type of players that they pick. I've done NBA themed retrospectives where we talk about highlights of the season, where we talk about which teams are rising and it's going well, where are we like them. We talk about teams that are underperforming and struggling, and we talk about have we got any parallels with where these guys aren't doing so well. One of my favorite boards is my Scrumopoly board, and it's almost a like for like comparison. And depending on where you land on the board, you generate a different discussion prompt. Really, really helpful and really fun. And it's good to take these sort of established, well-known activities, games, sports, and inject those into your retrospective sessions with the team, especially if the team have a shared interest in this. Just to harken back to an original point, one criticism I get is, do these always have to be geeky and nerdy? The main reason I got into themed retrospectives was I was on a team of sports heads and I didn't see many sports themed retrospectives out there. So I just started creating my own, and the reception, feedback and engagement that those generated within the team just blew me away. And that's how I got to where I am now, approaching 100 templates. So those are some really rich mechanisms you can use. Those are 4 really good ones to get started with, but by no means the limit. Your imagination's your only limit, so don't be hung up on looking at these that I've discussed today. There's tons more you can go through. And what I can hear you all saying is, or what I can hear Richard is, but Dave, are you saying I have to dive straight in and create a full session around one of these themes? And the answer to that is absolutely not. As you can see at the start of the session, we started with an icebreaker activity that was around Star Wars. And especially when you're just sort of inoculating your team with these and putting out the feelers around how are the team going to respond, this can be enough to get some feedback. All we need to do is put out an MVP for that themed session. We gather some feedback from the team. What did they like? What did they not like? And then that informs how we can then develop the next session and the next session and so on and so on. One thing I always like to build into my retrospectives is a bit of a feedback mechanism where we rate the return on time invested, we rate the retro, And I'd love to get feedback from the team on what elements were good and where they think elements were maybe a bit stagnant, a bit stale, where they didn't really feel the value. Really sort of embodying that agile principle of continuous improvement. Once you've done that with maybe a couple of questions, an icebreaker, the next step I often encourage teams to go to is remixes. And this is taking an established theme, like a mad, sad, glad retrospective, and putting a spin on that, sort of like for like. So for example, one of the remixes that I did was the Dwight Schrute retrospective, where we've got mad Dwight, sad Dwight, glad Dwight. And even this, given that sort of different visual element to the retro, again, it serves to keep that engagement high, and it gives the team something slightly different to engage with, and it brings out that conversational element. So don't feel like you need to dive straight in at the finish line and create something bespoke and detailed. You can get there in phases. Ultimately though, I hope a lot of you will get to the point where you create something new. This was one of the first ones that I created that wasn't sports based, around Star Wars. Built in an icebreaker element, a scaling element, a retro board with a collection of prompts, and a rate the retro session. And similar for one of my sports themed ones around golf. We've got an icebreaker, we've got a main retro board, and we've got a rate the retro element. So I hope a lot of you get to this sort of stage. I don't think themed retrospectives will be new to a lot of you, but I think that there's a lot of development that you can do at the individual level to improve, number one, your session design elements, building and creating elements that you think are going to get good results and outputs from the team. But then number two, once you've built it, that isn't the end of the story for me. Once I've built it, I really want to know how to leverage that session the best. And the only way I'll get better at doing that, in my opinion, is by delivering it more and more. So I encourage you to build some of these yourselves, give them a try, but don't build them, put them on the shelf and forget about them. Build them, use them, improve them, use again, improve again, and sort of keep your retrospectives alive. Give your retrospectives every chance to do the best by and for your teams. And I think I am just about towards the end here. Yeah, so if you're interested, if you want to give this a try and need some inspiration, there's a few different places you can go. Miroverse is always my go-to. As I say, Miro seems to me to have sort of won the battle of the whiteboards in recent months and years. So I encourage you all to have a look on Miroverse and check out a very extensive backlog of not just agile retrospectives, but all sorts of whiteboard templates to go over and look at there. A similar story with Miro. They have a community element of pre-built templates there where you can go and sort of outsource the responsibility of creating the sessions to someone else, and you can just be responsible for the facilitation. And finally, Boardle.io, which is a bit of an amalgamation of Miroverse, Mural, and all sorts of other whiteboard tools. It's sort of it's billing itself as a one-stop shop where you can go and get whiteboards from any provider and use those in your session. So I encourage you to check out those three if you are looking for some inspiration and some ready-to-go boards. I've also got a link tree. If you follow the link on the board, you'll get taken to my link tree. I've got I think I'm coming up on 100 templates there now. And I cover everything from sports, TV, music, agile, video games. Always keen to get some feedback and keen to get challenges around what we're going to do next. So if anyone's got any ideas that they want to collaborate on or want me to have a go at, then please let me know. I'm always happy to give them a try and see where I can drive out more content, more sessions, more whiteboards. And the final thing I want to sort of leave you with is look at the themed retrospective through an agile lens. Look at it as a bit of an experiment. Don't be put off thinking you don't want to be perceived as childish or the fun guy in the team. The little bit of creativity and effort that you put into these sessions goes a really long way. The team really respond well to the effort that goes into designing and creating these sessions, and the results show in the outputs that you get in those ways to improve the quality and effectiveness of the team. as we've touched on, trial, measure, and adjust. Don't just make one and then deliver it as is forever. Always be thinking, can I improve this slightly? Can I change the prompts? Can I adjust the icebreaker? Can I build in something else to get more value out of this session? Crowdsourcing your themes and rotating responsibility. Really good way to generate immediate buy-in from the team, and a really good way for you to expose yourself to a multitude of ideas very quickly. And as I've touched on a couple of times, the purpose of the sprint retrospective is to plan ways to increase quality and effectiveness. A direct quote from the Scrum Guide, and this is sort of the mantra that I have in my head as I'm putting these sessions together and delivering them, always thinking, this isn't about me getting the chance to show off as a visual thinking practitioner or as an agile facilitator or anything. The crux of the session always needs to be, how can we improve things for the team now and in the future? So have that as a bit of a mantra as you're trying this out and as you're running your experiment. And I think that's it. I think I've talked you all to death for enough now. So I'll open the session up for questions if anyone has any. Please fire away, come off mute, ask them, put in the chat. However's easier for you guys, let me know.
Yeah, maybe I will go first. Thank
Perfect.
you very much. Yeah, David, for this. I always thought retrospective as a social event, and you are just unleashing a lot of things to play with, creativity and all of this stuff. And it's very, very fantastic for me to explore. But in my mind, there's one thing in my mind developing here. Let's say, okay, something like this is a new team that never been exposed to agile things and everything, and then they go to retrospective, and then how I can bring the slice of everything, like how they let's imagine them from how I bring the context of their sprint work to the retrospective, and then guiding them to okay, let's discuss about the things that we work on, and then with this mix up of new things on the top of that, something like that. Yeah, maybe that's my question, my big question. Yeah.
So I hope I've understand the question correctly, but so let me give you a little bit of my experience. The retrospective that I love to use with new teams is the sailboat retrospective. I think that's a really good one to sort of break the ice on retrospectives and also get the team thinking about that theming element. So if it's a brand new team who aren't used to retrospectives, and especially theming, that sailboat retrospective is a really good first step. The second part about how do you connect the team's unique context and experience to the theme, I'd encourage you to have a go at remixing a sort of tried and tested template. So say your theme is something like, I don't know, say your theme's the Premier League, and you want to build a retrospective session for the team around that. Lean on something that's tried and tested, like a Mad Sad Glad, like a 4Ls, like a Start, Stop, Continue, and just change the prompt slightly to match with the theme. And that's a good way, again, to get a bit of a sense check and a bit of a litmus test from the team around how they're going to respond to that theme and element. I hope that's answered the question, Andreas, but if not, then reach out on LinkedIn. Happy to dig into that a bit more if you need to.
Yeah, I think that resonates to me, and it's, yeah, really makes sense. Thank you, David. Yes.
Excellent.
Cool.
Great. Thanks, Andre.
Well, we're at the top of the hour. Any more last minute questions?
What is your biggest challenge you've ever faced with retrospectives, and how did you overcome it?
Oh, that's a good one. There are so many challenges to pick from. I think the biggest challenge was probably at the start of the pandemic, when we were all sort of adjusting to getting onto teams, and I was part of a couple of teams who never turned the cameras on, you rarely heard some of them come off mute. It was very hard to generate any sort of conversational feel to the sessions. That was probably the biggest challenge, especially as I say at the start of the pandemic. And sort of by a little bit of a war of attrition, you sort of put out the feelers for an initial try at building that conversational dynamic. And I tried a couple of different things before I landed on themed retrospectives. And this was sort of what the team responded to really well. And that's why I'm sort of all in and bought in on them now, because I've seen them have that sort of switch flipping moment for the team where they think, this isn't just a work conversation anymore. This is something I can engage in at a deeper level than just that professionalism work level. I hope that's answered the question. I feel like I've had a bit of a moan about one of my old teams. Apologies.
Can you say something about this Scrumopoly?
Yes, I can. I can show you it as well if you like. Let me bring it up. So this was a board that I threw together a little while ago, and it works just like the game Monopoly, to be honest. We'll get team members to pick a piece that they want to put on the board. We'll start at go, and we've got an iframe code here where we press for a dice roll. So 9, for example. I'll take this one, for example. Let's say I land on light blue. And landing there, I now need to talk about what can be improved and capture that in the ticket board. So I've taken the Monopoly game and built a couple of mechanisms around that to turn it into what I hope is a fun and engaging retrospective session.
Brilliant.
I played it with my team last sprint a couple of weeks ago, and it was really good. we messed up with the dice a bit to begin with, because when you press play, you don't see it on someone else's. They can't see it unless you're sharing your screen, right? But the funny thing was we'd missed the whole bit where it says roll the dice. So we just pressed play, and then it kept coming up double 1. And it took us about 3 or 4 times before we realised that statistical probability of getting a double 1 4 times in a row, there was something up here. Yeah. But as a game, it was really good. Yeah.
There's another way you can do dice. There is actually an app. You were talking about apps, David, earlier. You can add to the dice app. And the way that works is you put a post-it on your boards and you put the dice app on it, and then it will just roll and everyone can see the number it rolls. So
Yeah.
just a variation.
That's good.
So you choose the number of sides, etc. And then you just allow it to, I think you highlight it and press the dice button, it should spin over.
Excellent. Maybe that's something I should improve on this one, then take this out and put something a bit more
It was really, we just weren't reading the instructions, to be perfectly honest. Yeah. So Dave, just a question from me is, do you theme all of your retros?
Not necessarily, no. Especially with new teams. Another one I love is this is one by Joanna. I can't pronounce her second name for the life of me, but she's done
is it Targenson or something?
It could be, yeah. But the sailboat retrospective, this is sort of my go-to as a first retrospective with any new team. The only thing I'll do with this is add what I call a compass element, just to plan out what the actions are and what we do next. But this is a great one to get a bit of a litmus test from your team and figure out, right, how are they going to respond to this? And then based on that feedback, I'll sort of tailor from there. Do we want to stay with tried and true, more traditional stuff, or is the openness and other avenues there to explore more of the themed stuff?
And when you're picking a theme that's got specific characters, have you kind of got a feel from the team that they know them, and you know that you're not going to go in there and you've realised that no one's watched Friends before?
Generally, yes. Generally, I'll get those type of sessions from the team, or I'll say, I'll encourage them to have a look, or I'll give some options. Say, out of these 3, which would you prefer? And if we're getting the one with the characters with the buy-in, we can sort of assume that they've got that.
Yeah.
But equally, you'll I wouldn't recommend this, but you'll be surprised occasionally at the people who don't understand the story and characters, what they'll come out with, and how that adds a bit of idiosyncrasy into your sessions, which is, it's tough to harness, don't get me wrong, but it gives you some surprising results.
Yeah. Thanks.
No problem. Thanks, Sammy.
If I can just add a couple of stories, or at least just one story, and that's, yes, there may be a resistance to doing these themed retrospectives, and you may feel like you have to start with a simple template like this, and sometimes that's exactly what's needed. But equally, I've had tales where someone's come to me and said, "Oh, we used your Die Hard themed retrospective at Christmas with a group of senior executives. We're talking C-suite level people, and they engage with the retrospective more than they ever have." So it can work the other way around, especially, basically it's choose the theme based on your audience and what they'll enjoy, and empower them to choose is what I would emphasize.
All right, I think that brings us to the end of our meetup today. Thank you, David. And I got a lot out of it, and for everybody else, please join Scrum Masters Universe on LinkedIn. It's a great group. I love to share out and keep growing. So I wish everybody happy holidays.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dave.
Happy holidays, folks.
So much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Happy Christmas.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Merry
Thanks.
Dave. Thanks again, Dave. Appreciate it.
Yes,
Thanks
Dave,
all.
thanks. And Chris, your input as well.
Yeah.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
See you in a few months.
That's exciting. Ready. I got to get a little info from you so I can get it posted right.
Chris, I've just seen you comment there. I must apologize. I should have added the virtual agile coach is it .co.uk or .com?
.co.uk. I'm crushed, David. You didn't include my
Oh,
website. It's got far more retro resources than Miroverse has got.
I must overhaul this immediately.
I put it in the chat. So
Thank you,
Yeah.
Jamie.
there was a link in the chat, and I also added a link to our shared retro swap board. There's a link to both of your sites there right at the top. So
I was having a look at your chat GPT stuff, Chris. Really just blown my mind. This I just can't wait to do more and more with it.
Did you see it in your live session?
I saw some notes on it. Yeah.
If you look at your boards live in the session, I created 4 new retros with ChatGPT.
I thought that was me copying and pasting something. You know, I was balanced.
that was me. In the background, I was just experimenting, right? And I saw your idea, so I created a Shakespearean one, a Rocky one, a basketball rules one, and that was just in seconds.
That is amazing.
That was live during this.
really,
Yeah.
do you have the what was the tool you used for dice that you were talking about?
It's just called Dice. It's an app. You just search for it in the integrations.
Okay.
It's just called Dice. Anyway, Dave, you and we can chat about that another time.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. But yeah, thanks a lot for joining, everybody. Really helpful. I think I'm probably going to make a run for it. But Jamie, Jeff, thanks very much for having us. Really enjoyed it. It was great.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
Did it. Happy holidays. Happy holidays.
Holidays.
Yeah, have a nice Christmas and New Year. Chris, I'm sure I'll speak to you beforehand, but have a nice Christmas and New Year if I don't speak to you.
I've just pinged you on LinkedIn saying if you want to chat sometime.
Yeah, definitely. 100%. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you.